So, welcome everyone. Nitin is a data scientist and database expert, and what I'm really excited about is he's passionate about democratizing data science education. And with that, Nitin, over to you. I'd request for a brief introduction, and then towards your lightning talk. And please feel free to share your screen whenever you want.
Okay. So I've been in the data business for about 35 years, initially in the relational database area, then in NoSQL and enterprise applications. Then my background is both in math and EE. So then I started getting interested in machine learning and more recently in AI, especially in using AI locally, sort of democratizing AI so that it's accessible to everybody, especially companies. And so the presentation is in that spirit, how you can run LLMs yourself rather than use the ones that are available in the web, and how these two can work together. So this says your laptop, your AI, which is a good catchphrase, but it's actually your machine, your AI, how you can run AI models on your own machine, and you're not restricted to what's out there. But first, we need to get rid of one misconception that's quite prevalent, that LLM means Chat GPT. So, consider this to be a very loud shout that LLMs is not Chat GPT. Even in the SaaS models, there are other LLMs like Cloud and Perplexity and so forth. So, uh, first of all, there are many SaaS LLMs. And secondly, SaaS is not the only architecture for running LLMs. So if you think of compute, then initially we had mainframes, and they were these big black boxes. And then we got PCs. So we got compute on our desktop and eventually on our laptop and finally on our phones. So think of that as the same evolution. Initially, there was just ChatGPT, and now we have the ability to run some of the same technology with, of course, lower capabilities because we don't have the resources that are available to SaaS architectures. But you can do a lot locally on the edge, so to speak, with LLMs both on the laptop, on the desktop, and soon on the phone. So why, first of all, why? Why do we want to do this when we've got this free stuff available? So first of all, they're a black box. Potentially, they're also a black hole that sucks up your data. And there is no guarantee that whatever you're typing in, whatever you're uploading, is not being used to train uh, uh, the LLM, and also whether you will continue to have uh, copyright over it because now you've shared it publicly. And so there is that concern, is that you may lose copyright if you upload your documents into the LLM. Secondly, there's no quality of service guarantee. How long the LLM will take to answer, how many requests can you make per day. None of that is guaranteed. Sometimes they say you have so many, but then you get shut off if the load gets too much. And we are in very early days, so people still haven't figured out the right resource allocations in the SaaS application to give a proper, stable service. And even with the paid version, you can get cut off after a while. So quality of service is an important part. I remember in the early days of ChatGPT, there were some one-person businesses that had built their business on ChatGPT. But as the load started increasing, sometimes the answers would come out different, and that caused some of these businesses to actually not work. And then again, no quality of service guarantee. And finally, if you want to run this as a business application, then your domain knowledge is certainly not in the LLM, and you are not going to take all your uh, confidential information, your IP, and upload it. So I think this is the one thing that is really holding back the application of AI in the enterprises, that people don't understand how to take AI and put it locally so that you can put your domain knowledge to in the have your domain knowledge available to the LLM to improve your processes, to improve your workflow, to improve your automation, to add intelligence, etc. So what are the kind of things you can do? These are some example cases. So for instance, in M&A contracts, they're very confidential. They have a lot of complicated clauses. And so you could potentially give this to a local LLM and say, hey, are there any gotcha kind of clauses in this contract that I should be watching out for? And what are there any unusual requirements or constraints in this contract? And an LLM that understands a sufficiently large LLM, which you can still run on your machine, should be able to pick out this because LLMs are really about the language. They're about English first and then other languages, but not so much intelligence as really language understanding. So that's anything that involves language in your business processes, a local LLM can be used. So the other one is when you have an HR manual and around holidays, employees start asking questions about, can I do this? Can I do that? What if I'm working for one day on my holiday? Will I get paid? Et cetera, et cetera. And then HR is fielding all of these emails around holidays. If you put an LLM in front of an HR manual, then a lot of self-serve question and answer can happen. So that's another example. And this is kind of the holy grail, the third one, where the people in the C-suite want to directly find out what is the state of the business. Before a quarterly meeting, the CFO wants to ask some last-minute questions, but the data science team says, oh, we've got this backlog, we can't do that. The holy grail is for the C-suite to have a chat interface where they can simply type in a question and it can directly get an answer from the data warehouse, either in language, ordinary language, or formatted with charts and graphs and so forth. And these days, when startups are going for further investment, there is something called a data room, where all of the information on your startup is available in a safe environment. But there's still a lot of documents, and an investor has to go through all these documents to figure out whether this is a safe or risky investment. And again, if you put an LLM in front of all of that, the investor can ask natural language questions. How is this compared to my other investments, et cetera, et cetera. So these are just examples of what can be done. And so the question is, I'm saying you can put an LLM in front of this, but what's the architecture? How do we do this? So there is a specific architecture that's emerging called retrieval augmented generation. So that's a long name, but that's typically what's happening is somebody writes a paper and then somebody just picks up that term and starts using it. So retrieval augmented generation, what does this mean? Typically, AI generates an answer for you, but it only generates the answer based on what is built in, whatever it has been trained on. The AI can't answer questions, say something that happened after its training date. So generation is what the AI does, but retrieval is something where your local domain information is in a special kind of database called a vector database. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And so there is, you can think of this as middleware, and this is the database, and the UI is just the chat interface. So this is the equivalent of the old three-tier architecture, but for AI. So what is the retrieval augmentation? So let's see what happens. The user asks a query that has to do with domain knowledge, say the HR query, and the query goes to the vector database, which generates a bunch of text chunks that look like they might be answers to the query. And this context retrieval engine takes that and sorts it out and gives the most likely answers to AI. And what AI then does is takes this and formats it in a form that humans will understand. It extracts the information and then gives a response. So this is typically the architecture now going forward for AI in the enterprise. And so I'll come back to the vector database. This is the equivalent in AI for the relational database in our business applications, where you have structured information in the form of tables. and numbers and your different sales results and inventory. It's all, everything is required to be formatted as a structured table. In the vector database, uh, it handles different kinds of data, especially text and images, and potentially video and audio. These are not data types that the relational databases handle very easily, but the vector database natively handles these kind of rich, unstructured data types. But to be able to do that, we have to be able to take this data, prepare it, and vectorize it, take data and put it in the form of that the vector database will understand, and then all of this other magic takes place. So what is a vector database and how do we vectorize this? Now, that's a subject in itself, too much to get into. But if I might give you a little bit of a taste, I am writing a book on this because I found that there was not enough information. So there's an O'Reilly book coming out on vector databases. It's already in early release, and you can go on the O'Reilly platform and see the first couple of chapters. 3 more chapters will be coming out in the next month or two. And there is some detail, quite a lot of detail on vectorization, on the RAG architecture, and practical applications with actual code. So it's meant for people to take and start building stuff with. So that's coming up soon. And finally, here are the other things that are important when you apply apply AI or LLMs in the enterprise. You've got to have new data processes. How do I vectorize? How do I clean up the data? How do I pick out PII, etc.? Vector databases don't have great governance, and so you have to figure out how to do governance, how to vectorize the data. Should I put it on a physical machine on my LAN, or should I put it in a virtual machine in my VPC? That's another question. Which LLM should I use? How do I actually run these LLMs? So these are the things that we haven't actually covered, but perhaps this can be subject of another talk. And now, assuming we have some time, I'm going to go and do a quick demo of an LLM that's actually running on my laptop. And if you want to get these, there are a number of these platforms for running it, but the simplest one is something called Olama. And Olama is actually a runner for models that you can download and run on your laptop. And they have a large catalog of models. This is the latest Google model. This is the latest reasoning model. This DeepSeek, which you may have heard a lot about a few weeks ago. All of these models, including the largest one, are available there. And depending on how much RAM and video memory you have, you can run it on your machine. So what I've done is I've downloaded it, and I've actually put it on my laptop, and it is a very bare bones chat interface. And so I'm going to ask it some questions that I've already asked, because otherwise it takes some time to compute. So I started asking it, uh, this is my typical go-to question when I test out a new LLM to see how much knowledge it has. And a qubit is a quantum computing term, and I want to see if this LLM has this in the knowledge. So I ask, what is a qubit? And it thinks for a second, and then it has some answers, which is pretty good, actually. And this, by the way, is the smallest model I have. It's a 1.7 billion parameter model that pretty much in future will run on your phone and will be able to do interesting things. Then I ask it some other questions. Uh, what is a vector database? And so it might take some time. And then key characteristics of a vector database are blah, blah, blah. And all of this, by the way, is running on my laptop, and it's 2 gigabytes of storage space. And I'm running this through Olama. And finally, just as an example, I'm going to ask it to generate some code for a very simple Chrome plugin that just does something dumb, which is put a button at the bottom of the page. I just want to know if this can understand enough to do that. And then it just starts generating the JavaScript. And then it'll tell you how to do it, and it'll tell you replace the index to HTML and so forth. So this is just to give you a flavor. I have much larger models on here. For instance, there's a Llama 370 70 billion model. My laptop is actually a very beefy laptop. I particularly got it for LLMs. It's got 96 gig of memory on it. It's a Mac. And so, just a word about how to run it locally. Macs have this unique capability that their memory that they use is used both for video RAM and or GPU RAM and for regular RAM. And so uh, it's particularly easy to run these on Mac laptops. For other laptops, often you have a GPU, but it doesn't have a lot of RAM. Maybe 2 gig, 4 gig is huge. Or you have to have a desktop with a lot of GPU cards. That gets expensive. But that's roughly, uh, hopefully, a flavor of how you can run LLMs on your laptop. And I'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Nitin. If you don't mind, you can if you can stop screen sharing.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Hopefully that was in time.
yeah, yeah, it's in time. Wasif Izan, do you guys have a question, or should I ask my silly question?
I mean, the most obvious
I
one. Yeah,
Yeah, I
you wanna
had one which is around more sort of the IP bit that Nitin you
Yes.
talked about and why to sort of do it on your own machine. And I was thinking in a broader sort of sense what your thoughts are because we've been thinking about this problem internally at Tintash in terms of the fact that we do need to enable all of our teams, engineers
Yes.
and designers and
Yes.
project managers with AI, but when you use GPT or something like that, you run the risk of
Yes. Yes.
violating a contract or anything. And I think
Yes.
the best we've come up with is deploying locally, but sort of giving access to everyone, but not the laptop bit that you said, just deploying on an AWS instance or something of that sort. So wanted to understand what your thoughts are on this. I do know that Copilot gives you a guarantee of sorts that if you take their sort of enterprise version, but the other programming tools don't. So just wanted your thoughts on
Well,
that because
I
yeah.
would say that, while we were talking about hardware and laptop, etc., the real sort of a default model for enterprise use or business use is to use a VPC and to run it on in the cloud. That's one. The other one, of course, is if you have a small team and you have a team that is media heavy and you're doing media stuff, then there is a Mac Studio, which comes with 128 gig or now these days 256 gig of RAM, and it's a small box for about 10K. You can run some very high end LLMs, and you can run multiple people working on it, working on media, etc. And otherwise, there are people who have done DIY machines. But the biggest problem with running local hardware, other than the Mac Studio, is that the GPUs take tremendous amount of power. So suddenly your power bill will go up by $1,000 if your stuff is running constantly. So that's why using it in the cloud in a VPC makes the most sense. And I know about, because my clients are currently on Google, I do know that the Google models are available uh, with privacy guarantees. And generally, Google has a history of when you are using the paid version, like Google Workspace, they don't use your data. So, out of all of the providers, there is a certain amount of credibility for the Google models because in the past they have given these guarantees. On the other end of the spectrum are, the other models. I won't name them, but there are some questionable practices with respect to your data.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I was going to mainly ask about the cloud aspect of it. That I mean, at the end of the day, it's about being able to run applications on the cloud.
Yeah.
That privately essentially allow you to train models
Yeah.
using your data. So I mean, in a sort of a similar theme, let's say a company like Tintash or any other company uses Google
Yes.
applications,
Yes.
and there's like tons of data that you already have on your Google Drive, for instance.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
how would in that context you'd be able to use existing data and train your LLMs to sort of use all of that context you might have in a place like a Google Drive, and
Yes.
being able to query it moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, uh, there is a need, especially if you have domain specific data to train your models on that. But a lot of times you can get away without specific training if your if your data and questions are not domain specific. For instance, one client I have, they want to process uh, incoming customer emails and categorize them as no response required or tech support or this, that, and the other. And they were trying to train models and things, and I just gave it to Claude and I said, I have these 5 categories. Can you classify these models? And it just went ahead and did it with 80-90% accuracy. Now if you have specific business knowledge, yeah, you need to train them. And there's a lot of there are a lot of sort of gremlins or gotchas in this, where if your data is in PDFs, this is one thing where we are still not 100%. We're extracting data from PDFs, images, graphs, and sometimes even tables where there is numbers and words. Sometimes it mixes up O and 0 and 1 and I and so forth. So depending on your kind of documents, uh, first of all, data extraction and vectorizing, this is the hardest part. Once you're able to do that, then a lot of the rest of it is better understood. But really, just like in relational databases, the cleaning of the data, the ETL, all of that is the hard part. And once you put it in there, then writing the right query and tuning it, etc. We have, as an industry, have a lot of expertise in that. But this extraction of data business is really still messy.
Hmm.
So if you have stuff on Google Drive, that is good. You can use Google models because they know how to straight go to Google Drive and take your information. Uh, but you still have to do this. You got to put it through a pipeline. Uh, Google has some models that are tuned for cleaning up data. So there is that. But still, that is still an art. It is not a science yet.
Hmm. Yeah, and I asked this in the context of, for example, Tintash being a services firm.
Yes,
Obviously, you have customers coming up to you and saying
yes,
that, hey, we want to build X, Y, and Z.
yes,
Can you give
yes,
us a quick ballpark?
yes.
And so
Yeah,
with
that's hard. If they ask you for a ballpark number ahead of time, that's very hard
Yeah,
because yeah,
but in the current context of things, let's say where you have, tons and tons of data from previous exercises in
yes,
place,
yes.
being able to retrieve that, being able to, as you mentioned, clean it up and be put it
Yeah.
in a useful form. Have you worked with, I mean, are there any sort of particular advice areas you would maybe
Well, I
tell
mean,
about that?
training of an LLM is really uh, supervised learning.
Hmm.
So, from machine learning side, if we know supervised learning, where you have to create a labeled data set and you have to provide a labeled data set to the machine, and especially on the Google side, they have AI Studio, where if you have a labeled data set with 500 or more examples, then AI Studio does it in a push button format. Now, whether that is good enough or not will depend on your data. But even all the later models, they are now making available. So, for a start, if you have not done it, two things. One is put it in a CSV format
Yeah.
with labels, classification labels, whatever you want, and then provide it to Google AI Studio. That's the first pass. That is not working, then you go to Vertex AI and you try to uh, come up with models. And then they have a few examples with notebooks that will run on Colab. And then after that, it gets more and more complicated. But a lot of this depends on the customer's data. How clean is it? And customers, one of the things, the good thing with Chat GPT is it has brought AI to the masses. The not so great thing is that it has made AI look much easier than it is. So when customers come to us, they want everything magically to work, and magically work yesterday for $0. You know, so so these are it's expectation setting with customers that AI is not there yet is the biggest problem.
It's interesting.
Okay.
I think at the core of it, the expectation management and setting problem is a universal theme.
Yes,
I think
but in
that
AI, especially because
yeah,
there's actually one potential contract which would have been big, but their expectations were so bad that I said I don't want anything to do with this. There's a group that had a whole ton of code, massive amounts of C++ code that they wanted to move to newer C++. It was old and obsolete. But their principals who don't understand any technology had gone to ChatGPT and asked it to generate a plan. And now they wanted these people to implement that plan. Okay.
there we go.
So you probably will get those. And it's very hard to reorient those people to say, look, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
Because they will say I will just go to somebody else. So that's one of the biggest issues right now for customers that are not mature and sophisticated, that they have unrealistic expectations.
I just had two questions. One of them may be very silly, but in order to understand this better, and then the second one. So the first one is, Nitin, if you could, with means of an analogy, help me understand what exactly encompasses an LLM, in
Okay.
the sense that, there's the human brain, but each human brain has the ability to process language,
Yes.
then the ability to process information it already holds, and there are certain schemas it's aware of,
Yes. Yes.
and then it leverages like what it can do, right?
Yeah.
So one of these LLMs that we put on our laptop, how
Yeah.
much knowledge does it have on its own within
Yes.
those? Like you said, it's only a couple of GBs.
Yeah.
So,
But that is the smallest one. Okay. The big ones are pretty. So here's the thing: the size of the LLM, the number of billion parameters, is proportional to the amount of knowledge that is packed in there. Because the
okay,
size comes from how much data you have processed on the internet from other places, and you have ingested into the knowledge base of the LLM. The
understood.
processing part in most LLMs is pretty similar. It's this knowledge base that gets bigger and bigger with bigger LLMs. So the 1.5, 1.7 billion one, that's the smallest possible one, and it is still that capable. So the bigger ones are actually, I've had sort of philosophical discussions about the philosophy of language and all with these LLMs that run on my laptop. It's quite fascinating. So they have a lot of knowledge.
Cool, cool. Okay. And the second question, which perhaps is the last question of the day, but what do you love most about what you do?
Oh, I get to play with newer and newer and newer technology, and also interact with. I mean, greatest joy comes from solving a customer's problem. Is if they are really pulling their hair out, and then you're able to walk in there, and one is solve the problem, and the other is show them how to do this themselves. Right? That's because my background is in instruction and training and so forth. So knowledge transfer so that make them self-sufficient is that's my biggest joy.